Welcome back to the Modern Hippie podcast. I am joined today by Daniel McQueen, who is a psychedelic specialist, psychedelic therapy educator, and activist with over 20 years of transformational and healing arts experience. Daniel is the author of the book Psychedelic Cannabis, as well as the executive director and co-founder of the Center for Medicinal Mindfulness in Boulder, Colorado. It is there that Daniel has spearheaded a program I am super curious about and look forward to diving in on today, known as the DMTx program, utilizing the protocols developed by Dr. Andrew Gallimore and Dr. Rick Strassman for exploration into the DMT realms. It's a very exciting topic, and thank you so much for joining me today, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Barrett. It's good to be here.
And so, what sparked your journey into the psychedelic realms? What was like the catalyst that got you going?
Oh, gosh, that's a big question. I think I was just always curious as a child, always a little different, didn't quite fit into typical boxes. And so I had to explore ways of living that fit me more than just me trying to fit into something else. And I was always interested in spirituality. I was always interested in meditation and mysticism, Western mysticism. And so it just felt like psychedelics were a natural fit. My first experience with mushrooms, I was 18, and I had a really deep realization about the nature of reality in some ways, but it also induced a kind of a mental health crisis. I don't think I was ready for that's such a big experience. And so that showed me both sides of the path, the struggle as well as the benefits. And was lucky enough to be part of underground intentional spiritual communities that use psychedelics. And then I also got my master's in transpersonal psychology. So I stepped into the psychological side of the work too. So it's just always been an unfolding path for me. Like psychedelics may not be like the peak or the primary interest. It's more about spirituality and self-actualization, curiosity of the unknown, all of those things. And so psychedelics just was a natural fit for my particular identity in psychology.
I love that word that you use, curiosity. And I think that's such a big part of exploration into these things and how to continuously have an experience that sparks growth and transformation that can sort of steer us away from finding ourselves in a bad position, a challenging position. But when we can push and explore with curiosity, it really fosters a lot of information that comes up and things that we can do with that.
Yeah,
What a
curiosity is
blessing
one of
to.
our greatest allies, right? What's under
Yeah.
this? What's behind this curtain? Like I think in many ways it got me into a lot of trouble growing up, but it is a good asset to have, right?
Absolutely. And something we lose as children. And it seems like as adults on this
Hmm.
spiritual journey, this self-healing journey, we keep trying to get back to this childlike sense of play and
Right,
wonder and curiosity
right.
that really helps our path forwards unfold.
Hmm. I'd like to, like this authentic self-expression, like this playful, curious, trusting aspect of self. I really like living in that. It's a very creative place for me. It's inspiring. It's playful and fun, and it helps when we engage the really hard parts of the work. To allow ourselves to step into even those areas with trust and joy and
Mm.
a light heart. I think it's pretty essential. I think it's as important as any of the other traits that we bring into these works.
So true. That sense of safety in it while you go into the sacred shit of
Mm.
knowing that you're going to be held, knowing that the transformation is part of the process. Do you see people tend to lose? Have you seen people lose themselves when they go into those depths? And has that been primarily because of a lack of safety and security? There's like a full
Mm.
breakdown that happens.
Hmm. Well, so we have a center here. We have a clinic, and we work with these medicines. And I guess within that container, when people lose themselves, it's a beneficial thing, right? It's an ego death and then a rebirth and a clearing. But I do counsel people and have worked with people who've come to our program who have experienced ego death in uncontained containers, uncontained spaces with lack of safety, and that can be really jarring. It can be really difficult for them, and part of my job is helping them, bring themselves back together. So it's definitely something we pay attention to, and can definitely be uh, a factor in someone's experience, right? But it would be something that we try to allow to happen in a contained and safe way. So it's not something that we experience regularly in our clinic. If that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it's good. You're creating a
Yeah.
safe space, so good. I've just
Um,
recently got back from 2 weeks of ayahuasca ceremonies in Peru, and we had eight
mm,
ceremonies in total. But there was, as an experienced psychonaut myself, I had a pretty significant ego death that happened one night, and I'd been experimenting with pharmawaska also in the month prior, and had a
mm-hmm,
massive night of ego deaths on that. So when I got to this one, I was again just sort of like, when do the ego deaths stop? And I think they never stop. There's that constant shedding, but for one of the few times in my life I ever really thought I was going to die, I was so grateful that I was in a very safe container where I'm looking at Maestro, energetically screaming for him, and he's looking at me back. I got you, I got you, I got you, and you got you, and you got you. Those safe containers are just so paramount.
mm-hmm. Well, it's a really big
I'm
deal. I mean,
curious.
this is such a big work that we're involved in.
Mm,
So I'm glad you had that safety. You know.
thank you. What medicine did you start building a relationship to work with first?
Um, Gosh, good question. Well, I think psilocybin mushrooms was the go-to for a long time for a lot of people, myself included. And then MDMA really became a thing, for therapeutic use. For what was that? When really MAP started getting off the ground and being more active in the mainstream. So about 15 years ago. Um, I've worked with a lot of different medicines. 5-MeO has been a really good ally for me. 5-MeO DMT, and I just
Mm.
happen to be part of a community. Gosh, it's probably been close to 20 years, 25 years now that medicine has been in my life. And then cannabis has been a huge ally of mine. I know that a lot of people don't associate with cannabis as a psychedelic, but I wrote my book on cannabis as a psychedelic, and to teach people how to do it. And working with cannabis actually helped create our whole program here. So I have a lot of appreciation for all the medicines, and I think they all have benefits and they all have things to really pay attention to. And right now in our clinic, we're working with 4 medicines with the new laws in Colorado: uh, cannabis, ketamine, psilocybin, and DMT. And so creating protocols that are specific to the person that may include a few of the medicines in a series of sessions has been incredibly beneficial. It's been paradigm shifting for me. And so I just have a lot of appreciation for a lot of the medicines. And that a particular medicine will come into my life at a particular time to help me through a process, and I'll learn it and work with it, and then it'll subside in a way, and then something else will emerge into my practice, into my life. So I've just been following those threads for a long time now.
I like that study essentially that you've done with each medicine. I like to compare it to kind of reading a textbook, and every time you take a medicine, you're like reading another chapter and really doing a deep dive into learning about it. For me right now, I'm deep diving into ketamine, and what's
Mm,
unfolding is really powerful. I started with ketamine about 3 years ago, and the watching it unfold, where in the beginning it was like, I have no idea what's going on here, but I know if I don't keep going back, I might not figure it out. to now
Mm,
I'm at a place where I'm harnessing it and having these powerful breakthroughs and
mm,
really understanding what it does for me so I can help others with it. And how would you
mm.
describe ketamine and that using it as a tool? How would you describe it?
Yeah, my path with ketamine is similar to yours. Like the first several times I used it, it was interesting, it was psychedelic, it was visual, but I didn't feel like they had the experiences themselves had much meaning to them. Some of it was kind of
Mm.
cartoony, you know. And but afterwards, I just felt so much better. Right, there's something about the ketamine that just helped regulate my nervous system, helped reset something in my system to allow greater capacity to feel big emotions and be more resourced. So there were incredible benefits, but I thought, maybe is this it? Maybe this is all there is to ketamine. But as I developed a relationship with it, I understood, like I started to find that I could go deeper, it became more transpersonal, and now it's become almost DMT like for me, very very meaningful and hyper visual and all of that. So I find it, like, how would I describe ketamine? It is a dissociative, so we want to acknowledge like the its unique trait as a psychedelic, and that it is a dissociative, which in some ways allows us to take a break from some of our like surface layers of experience, from tensions in the body to um, mental states that don't feel good, right? It's an opportunity to take a break, but it doesn't really feel like you're taking a break from everything, because it, like a psychedelic, you then have this capacity to turn towards something that might be really heavy or really evocative or deeply meaningful, that requires an incredible amount of attention, and turning towards that curiosity even when it gets difficult is so present, so important there. And um and so that's how I would describe it, is that there's a part of it that's dissociative, but that dissociation, as opposed to just checking out, allows you to turn towards something that might be under the surface, like a deeper core meaning of something in life. And it's not always easy, even though the medicine
Mm.
itself can feel positive. The internal experience can be difficult. um, we're doing these ketamine groups here now, and I actually had the opportunity to be a participant in our last series. And so I just did a couple of ketamine journeys just last week, and it had been a while, and I knew I needed to do some kind of like maintenance work inside. And so it wasn't easy. There were a couple of times I was ready to be like, okay, I'm done. I'm never doing this again. So even the experienced psychonaut, there can be these moments of like, oh wow, this is really big. This is really hard. But I did it again, after that one, and I just felt a lot of resiliency returned to my system in a way that had been, difficult to feel for a little while there. So it's a good tool, but I think it's one of, like, it, just like all the powerful tools, probably should be used very intentionally and with a lot of awareness and safety protocols around it, given the potency of it.
Absolutely. I have such respect for doing them safely, being aware of what you're taking, making sure that you're being held by someone or a situation that makes you feel ready for what you're tackling. And you're so right. There are definitely those situations of, yeah, even as an experienced psychonaut, going, what the heck happened here?
Mm,
Um, I'm really fascinated lately by this concept of combining it with cannabis. And what I've been experiencing is that, ketamine sort of gets that default mode network offline. And then by lacing in a plant medicine, now you have the intelligence of a plant that really offers a lot of guidance,
mm,
that your default mode network is even more offline than it would normally be on that plant medicine, allowing for a greater download of the information.
mm,
I've also been a massage therapist and energy healer, and so the things that come to me are often these deep explorations of the energy systems of the body, and being shown all the different acupuncture lines and all the different points on the body and what they do, and feeling on my own body when I press here, I also feel it there. And this is
mm,
stuck, let's move that. I've even
mhm,
been able to have communication with my own internal systems of running like a checklist through the body of what's broken, what needs fixing,
mhm.
fix it, fix it, fix it. And
Yeah, it's like a
it's been really,
maintenance is, yeah. Hmm.
yeah. This last journey in particular, I actually became consciousness. I became God, and I am God, you are God. This, surface we're sitting on is God. Everything's
Hmm.
God. Everything's consciousness. But
Hmm.
I got to experience it through consciousness's eyes, and it was almost like a deep spiritual quest. I barely felt ready for the depth of
Mm,
understanding how things got created from the very beginning and what got created after that, and how everything constantly evolved to eventually create the mythologies that we have, to create the earth, to create each one of us. And it almost felt like getting like a PhD in understanding truly we are all one.
mhm.
Really powerful, powerful shift.
Right. Yeah. So, just not acknowledging the mechanism of that, right? Like ketamine allows us to disassociate from just our little being so that we can connect to our awareness to the overall being, sense of being that's always with us, right? That we're all made out of the
Mm,
fabric of this consciousness, everything, and that's the foundation of animism, is that everything is alive, everything is conscious, and we're all interrelated. And I think that's a really
mm,
powerful space to be in. And I like what you're saying about like kind of like checking in with your body systems. Again, like clearing some of the layers, it allows us to look at the insides, the energetics and the where we hold tension. And then I think
mm,
with ketamine too and cannabis, it allows us to flake off or release the tensions that are causing us harm, right? Or open the meridians, for, to use that language even. And I think it's a good
mm.
maintenance tool. Like what if these medicines gave us the capacity to maintain our bodies in a way that we couldn't otherwise? And how could that not affect our
Exactly.
growing old process and our health and well-being process,
Mm.
So,
A thousand times over, it made me have an appreciation for how all of the Eastern medicine systems were created, to actually be in that space and start rubbing my feet, and to feel internally where I would push and then feel it correlating to an organ, and being like,
right.
oh my God, I see how they figured that out. And
Hmm.
that wasn't knowledge I had before that moment. And,
Hmm.
being guided to something was in my neck, and as I just got it out, and I could feel it corresponding to the opposite side on my back, this pain I've been having for
Hmm.
months. And it was like, oh, it was from here, got it, now it's
Hmm.
gone.
Hmm.
And then rerunning those
Hmm.
systems of, I felt my eyes untangle. I felt just all of it. I can tell that you totally get it, but what a profound, I like that maintenance to run on the body.
Sorry, Barrett, you froze there. I didn't hear that last part.
Oh, that's okay. I just said, I agree. I like how you phrase that. It's a profound maintenance to run on the body.
Hmm.
Mm,
Yeah, and like you said, adding cannabis to it will then allow like that. Not only the physiological effects of the cannabis, which I think are really important to the healing process, but that plant medicine intelligence that, like, for lack of a better term, I think ally is a really wonderful way to frame
mm,
our relationship, because there's something inherently caring about these medicines for us, and they're there to support us in our healing. And so, what if we could pinpoint the core cause of an injury, bring our awareness to it, and something begins to shift because of that awareness? What if it were that easy? And these
mm,
medicines allow us to play in these spaces and learn skill sets so that we can do them more effectively. And so I'm a huge fan of medicine work, even when it's difficult. It just needs to be used in a way that's supports the process in a time frame that the body and the psyche can handle, right? And with that,
Yeah.
we can build whole systems that wouldn't exist otherwise, right? New possibilities that would emerge that just wouldn't be possible otherwise. So yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of these things.
Me too.
Yep. Let's just
Um,
acknowledge it's okay to be a fan of this work. Yeah.
well, and it's been so exponentially rewarding. As I was doing a deep dive into studying a bit more about the phoenix last night, and how the phoenix like intentionally lights itself on fire in its nest of like sacred items to flash burn and emerge all over again. I feel like that's what the personal transformation journey is. We are constantly lighting ourselves on fire and becoming new versions
Mm,
of ourselves, and these medicinal tools help us expedite that process, so that it can be like a flash burning as opposed to a slow shedding of the skin, but a
mm,
truly explosion and surrendering of who we were into becoming who we were meant to be.
mm,
um, Even in the last few weeks, some cannabis laced in with issues I've been surmounting, ketamine, sorry, laced in with issues I've been surmounting, have helped me really connect with my higher self. In that, that default mode network comes offline just enough where my higher self has a resounding, clear telephone line of,
mm,
this is what's in alignment for you, this is what we should do, this is what brings us joy and happiness and peace. um, and I'm curious, when you work with clients and patients in dosing them, is there a range? Do you normally keep it within a therapeutic range, or is there a point at which I don't know if there's a clinical term for a K-hole, but like, is there a point at which it is best to send someone into the absolute dissolution of themselves and their
mm,
consciousness?
mm. Yeah, I don't know what the clinical term for KO is.
There should probably be one.
Yeah, right. But I think there's therapeutic applications to it. There's, so it's not one is better than the other. It's just maybe one's indicated more than the other in a particular situation, right?
Mhm.
If somebody's really so, and you're speaking to the default mode network, and my understanding is like that's our pattern of thinking, and for some people it can be really entrenched, right? And especially somebody with like OCD or neurosis or lots of worry, lots of anxiety, maybe thinking about the process in a more psycholytic or therapeutic dose isn't going to be helpful. They need to break out of that
Mm.
pattern. And so a stronger dose might be, um, a way to help, like you said, maybe flash him out of it, of the phoenix, instead of taking a couple of layers off at a time. Right.
Mm.
And then somebody with really strong defenses, getting them into a space that they can't think about something, they just have to experience it, might really be beneficial. They're just fully immersed in it. So sometimes we're not light on the dosages when it comes to our program. Like we provide intramuscular shots in the arm,
Mhm.
right? And so it's a and instead of the lozenges, we work with lozenges sometimes when people request them, but we're mostly providing intramuscular shots of the ketamine. So it's a real quick onset, and it's a cleaner experience. I'm really sensitive to ketamine, and so especially the lozenges, I'll feel uncomfortable and sort of intoxicated after the journey is over, and that's an uncomfortable
Mm.
space for me. And what I'm learning for myself is that I don't really need to turn off my full default mode network to benefit from these experiences. Like I have enough mindfulness capacity to engage it. And so, but in the beginning, I would maybe go for like those deep dive experiences. But for me, my personal interest is kind of the medium level dose, so that I can remain present and conscious, but fully surrender, like choose to surrender into it. And so I think for me, having a skill set in this space, I don't need that full heavy dose. But that might be what would be called contraindicated for someone. I don't know if you've ever taken like a low dose mushroom experience where it opens all of these processes but doesn't provide a lot of support to them. It's just a really uncomfortable
Yep.
kind of midway space, right? And I
Yes.
think that can happen with ketamine too, right? So you want to make sure that they have enough ally in their system to fully support their experience. So we do deep dives here, and but we also talk about stepping into the medicine experiences. So we do it like we don't just do one-offs. We work with ketamine in pairs, two journey experiences. Cannabis, we do two journey experiences, and so we might start kind of a medium dose in the first one, with the option of a booster. So a person can always be,
Mm.
choose to go deeper if they want. But then after that first data set, we can say, okay, how was your experience? And we'd listen to their struggles, listen to their experience itself, and then from there they might have a choice to go. They want to go deeper with the medicine, or we might recommend they go deeper too. So if somebody's brand new to the medicine, I think ketamine is a good one to start with, and we don't have to start with like super heavy doses for them to get some benefit. We really try to support people stepping into the work before the big deep dive. But like I said,
Yeah.
some people who are just really struggling, we might give them a big shot of ketamine to just help them reset. Like, there's no thinking your way through that trauma. There's no thinking your way through that neurosis or that struggle or that anxiety. Your whole system, like you were talking about the meridians and the physical body, just has to reset the default mode network. It's just like if your computer is glitching, you can't figure out what to do. What do? You restart it,
Yeah.
and everything comes back online, and it's fine. And that's what ketamine, I think, does more than anything for people. It just helps restart their systems. So we use it as an intervention if somebody's really struggling, not quite ready to do like deep content dives with trauma or whatever it is they're working on. We'll invite them to start with ketamine to just help them regulate their system and reset. It's really a good medicine for that.
Mm. Yeah, I can really see that. It's this past week, I've been navigating that with a friend on, we've been having like low dose ketamine sessions and then going into inner child work
Mm-hmm.
and speaking to those parts of us. And I had yet to do something really guided with someone walking me through that transpersonal work while in the medicine. And I was even shocked in myself how much I just broke down, and to hold and lock hands with my 7-year-old self and to just discover the things that she wanted then are still the things that are my core
Mm-hmm.
core wants and desires now, which is like freedom. And
Mm-hmm.
integrating that and having that beautiful journey in that medicine space was just so eye-opening.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. So, if you go into a really heavy or deep ketamine experience, there's not going to be as much content like that, right? It's
Mhm.
just going to be more experiential, right? Or flying through the cosmos or becoming one with all things. Whereas there are these wonderful therapeutic layers that require support and guidance, but with that guidance you can choose to go deeper, and then because it's a lower dose, you can remember more of the content and connect with those aspects of self that might have been not fully acknowledged or didn't know they were around. So I think that that's a great place to do a lot of great work. And I the parts work, connecting with my inner child and all my parts, has been a really important experience for me as well. And you're just not going to
Mm.
get that much on like the really really heavy doses, right?
Yep, absolutely. Um, I, I think last year one of my core tenets was like go as big as possible. I was a professional wakeboarder. I love
Mm,
adrenaline sports. Pushing the boundaries of consciousness is like a really deep deep dive for me, and I got an important lesson in January about the gluttony of that.
Hmm.
And so since I've been exploring more of the medicines with these therapeutic doses and really re-navigating and renegotiating what drew me to them so much in the first place, which was their healing capacity and their
Hmm.
intelligence. So
Hmm.
I think there's such a beautiful range with them of the healing and the therapy, and then also when you get to a certain point, the deep exploration of consciousness for your
Hmm.
spiritual growth.
Hmm.
And as one psychonaut to another, I'm curious what it is that you experience in the depth of like a ketamine K-hole.
What do I experience? Gosh, I mean, I just did this. uh, it's so hard to describe. Um, I feel like in the deep spaces, it's like I'm shedding, like all the aspects of myself are shedding. Anything that's an illusion, any tensions or pain, or just shedding off. Maybe shedding isn't the word. Sometimes it's like chunks of myself are just breaking off and clearing.
Mm,
Heaviness is breaking off and clearing, and then underneath all of that is just pure awareness, or and it can be a beautiful experience, but it can also be like so awe-inspiring. It can be scary, right? It can maybe even feel overwhelming. Um, and so that's, so I enter these states of consciousness that, and if I can, and I'm getting pretty good at this, what I'll do is I'll be in such a deep, like almost egoless state. But what I'll do is I'll have enough awareness to bring a thought into it, like a question or an idea in my life. And I will bring that into my awareness and just let it sit in that space with me,
mm,
and I'll start to be able to unpack and see that question or that wondering and the underlying reality of it from that perspective. And I found that to be really helpful. So one is just like a returning to resourcing, just returning to resiliency, returning to who I really am, not who I am burdened by all the struggles of my life, right? Like life is hard, like it's complex. It's can be stressful at times, right? So that gets cleared, and within that space, I feel like I can bring in things that are meaningful to me to find some sort of either resolution or clarity, or if it's a problem, even just solutions, right? Like maybe it's okay to receive a solution to a problem instead of having to struggle with it forever. So those are my experiences, and then as I'm doing this, like I'm having my body is going through an experience, like my synesthesia, my felt sense is changing. Like there's something really expansive about the medicine itself that changes my perception of my body. And I feel that sometimes I feel like I'm either being moved or being worked on by energetic beings.
mm,
um, and then I'll be having like a visual experience too, where sometimes it's dark and I'm just in these really expansive rooms. That's a not an uncommon ketamine experience. But then other times I'm flying through the cosmos with like the intergalactic space fleet, or and it's like hyper technological advanced civilizations, alien technology, vibes to it. It feels spiritual, but it also feels like hyper technological as well. And that's a very unusual experience with ketamine. And I've noticed I have more vivid visuals and more colorful visuals if I do combine cannabis with it as well. I think there's something about that combination that can make it very DMT like in a way,
mm.
you know.
Absolutely, I agree, and thank you for sharing that. I so rarely encounter someone else who has gone into the depths and has words to articulate what
Mm,
they've experienced there. And my experience is not dissimilar. I often am in these rooms that are constantly evolving, that I'm constantly moving through. There's like
mm-hmm,
I call ketamine like a four-dimensional experience because even though your body system goes offline, um, you're moving in a way like you're on a
Mm-hmm.
ride at Universal, and it's just like constantly like, oh, did you see that, as you pivot and go somewhere else. And
Mm-hmm.
or I'm flying a lot through the cosmos, and things are made up of stars, and there's sometimes other beings there. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really fascinating. Sometimes I'm curious, who are these beings, and sometimes they're people I know, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
even get to see like a partner and work out with them what's going on lately, and
Mm-hmm.
get messages of, I need to show up differently, like that. And I think that speaks
Mm-hmm.
to bringing that question in
Mm-hmm.
as well. And then I've noticed most recently that, like you said, there's this, all of the versions of me, all the things that are inside of me that make up my core essence, I really get to see in that K hole. And I really get to experience my energy in its purest forms. And then sometimes I get to experience different flavors of me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's always sort of like one flavor that gets put back in the body. Um, that, but it does seem like this beautiful unwrapping and unraveling. And
Mm-hmm.
in my beginning journeys, I noticed a lot of that flaking off of what wasn't serving me
Mm-hmm.
anymore, to really become more of my truest essence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, well articulated. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's like like you described it, there's like an unwrapping and then a realization of what's truly meaningful, and then a reconsolidation, like a reorganizing of whatever that got unwrapped so that we can be more in alignment with our higher self, right? I think
Mm,
for me, it's with ketamine, it's always a shock. The biggest shock for me is always getting to see what really matters in my life. Like what matters to me, what's most important to me, and then with that realization, the integration becomes reorienting to my life so that whatever that was that really mattered is as prominent as possible. And so again, we sometimes get shut down because of stress or the day-to-day grind, and we forget what matters to us, even if we think we know. And ketamine puts it front and center, and it'll show you. I mean, any of the medicines do really, but ketamine does also puts it front and center, and it also shows you where you're out of alignment pretty quick.
mm,
So this last ceremony I did was, my family was just so prominent. My wife and my two children, just so prominent, and like I'm doing this work, this medicine work. We have the clinic so that I can take care of my children, right? Like, and be a good father
mm,
to my children. And so, why not really focus on that instead of all the busy work? Um, what would it look like to bring just making, positive contact with my children and my wife, right? And so, after that ceremony, the integration was just we're doing stuff as a family. Let's go out. Let's go see a movie. We went to see the Barbie movie. We did normal things, but I just
ooh,
spent time with my little girls. And that's what the message was from the last one, was just how important that was to me.
mm. I love those kinds of messages that just get you realigned, and in that importance of what it's all for. And we can get so distracted by the day-to-day minutia. And at the end
Hmm.
of the day, if it's not your children, if it's not your family unit, if it's not whatever it is that's important to you, then what is all the other stuff for?
Hmm. Exactly. And the loss of like getting lost in all that other stuff and not doing what really matters. I think that's a big thing that we want to pay attention to. So there can be grief in that. If if like one day you wake up from a ketamine journey, realize it had been 20 years since um, were living into what really mattered. There's a grief process that comes with that. But as we clear the grief, then we at least have the opportunity to start anew. And I think that's what these
Mhm.
medicines provide to us.
Yes. And now, at what point did that get you interested in DMT, and even more specifically, intravenous DMT, which is the DMTx program?
Yeah, gosh, how did I? So I was interested in DMT even before I had worked with ketamine. A friend of mine had introduced me to changa, the smoke version of DMT. Maybe how long has it been now? 12 years or so, 13 years ago, and it's so short. Like it's a
Hmm.
highly evocative experience, utterly life transforming, world reality, existential, breaking through, right? All of the things. But it was too short. It's like 3 minutes, 4 minutes in these peak spaces. And you get blown into this whole new reality that is appears to be completely inhabited by these hyper intelligent, hyper dimensional beings that don't even seem animal. They're so alien to us, right? They're not even, some of them are not even humanoid. Um, but it's just so short. And I've never truly been drawn to working with ayahuasca. It's just like, it's just for whatever reason it hasn't called to me yet in a big way. And I also have, like, personally, I have some chronic stomach conditions which make it hard for me to hold things that generally induce nausea, and so it might not be as safe for me to actually regularly take ayahuasca. um, and so Rick Strassman and Andrew Gallimore actually came up with the idea, and they wrote this paper and published it in what, 2016, 2017. And I read it, and I was about how to extend the DMT peak experience into a longer session using targeted infusion technology. And that's, so it's real simple. It's actually really simple. This is an infusion pump that's used in ketamine treatments and anesthesiology. So the technology already exists. Um, and I was just fascinated by this idea. It's just something about it inspired me beyond anything I had experienced before. I was really thinking, I think one of the things, the question I asked, I remember the question I asked, which led me to explore this, was if, okay, Daniel, like, you're a healer, like, this is what I do for a living. I work in the healing profession. Like, I got trained as a psychotherapist, even though I no longer identify as a psychotherapist, and I work with people to heal really big trauma. And I at a certain point, it's like that became my day job. It's what I do. I'm immersed in it. I love it. But there's a thread of feeling like this is what society requires of me to be accepted by mainstream society. Oh, you're interested in psychedelics. Those are drugs. But as long as you use them in a way that don't hurt people and can help heal people, maybe you're okay. Maybe you're, like, you have a place in mainstream society if we can use you in some way. Does that make sense? Um, like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like a mainstream patriarchal imposition that I am only allowed to exist if I'm usable by this mainstream system. So the mainstream system causes all this injury, causes war, causes trauma, and somehow Daniel's responsibility and all medicine people's responsibility for us to have the right to exist, we have to give back to this society by healing the trauma that was induced by the system in the first place. It felt like
Mm.
a setup. It didn't feel like, again, I love being a healer. This is what I do, but this part of it, to be um, accepted by society, didn't fit. Like, I'm counterculture. I never was part of this society. Why would I strive to be accepted by it? I consider it toxic, right? So I started thinking about this question. If my interest in psychedelics, if I had that, if I already had, like, the healership piece taken care of, which I did, I have a clinic, I help people, I have a whole team of people helping people. I've got that down. What am I called to do as a psychedelic facilitator, as a psychedelic guide? What inspires me the most? And I started thinking about that study, or that, the proposal that
Mm.
Rick and Andrew made about extending the DMT state. And I realized that that was like the apex of what we could do as a psychedelic culture. It was like the most complicated medically, it uses advanced medical technology, uses pharmacokinetic principles of infusion rates and all these things. It's hyper complex, but it's also connected to like an ancient technology, just like consciousness exploration, just for the sake of consciousness exploration, not anything else. And just because I was curious, like we do this because we can. And I was like, so I started talking to people about it, about this idea that Andrew came up with. And people always started asking me, well, what would it take to do it? What would it actually take to do this, to pull this off? So I started thinking about that, and I started talking to people about that. Well, this is what it would take to pull this off. This is what we would do. And then they started to ask, well, why not do it? Why not just go ahead and do it? And so I started to explore actually bringing it into the world. And I'm not part of a research organization. I'm not part of a university. And so for me, it became an issue of how do I do it within my means as a human being on the planet outside of the research environment. Um, so it's like anything with psychedelics. I think one thing led to another, one curiosity cultivated into another curiosity until it got its own momentum, right? And then I felt like there was something. One, at first it was like something interfering with our ability to engage it, and then all of a sudden it opened up, and we were able to do it. We were actually able to facilitate our first crew of DMTx psychonauts.
That is so exciting, and I'll share with you that is one of my absolute goals is to join your DMTx program and explore as a psychonaut. I think that's for me one of my callings as well. So I resonate so deeply with your
Mm-hmm.
journey of going in there and seeing what's there and bringing that information back. Um, I've had a few ayahuasca journeys where I've broken through to the other side and then gotten these tours from all these different aliens to go and observe or to sit with them and learn knowledge and to sort of figure out what that meant and how to bring it back and how to navigate. Um, and I'm curious if the DMTX is like you'd mentioned. I don't know if you said this yet, but we were talking before, and you mentioned you guys have been doing 30-minute immersions. Then you're building up to an hour. And how is that different, in your opinion, than simply going for someone? I know you said ayahuasca is not for you, but simply going for someone else to ayahuasca and experiencing that breakthrough on ayahuasca for what's usually probably
Mm-hmm.
30 minutes to 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Ayahuasca is a wonderful technology, right? And it's amazing, right? So there's no better than or anything like that. And some people would say, well, ayahuasca is better because it's more natural, right? Whereas we're using like this is definitely not accessible. It's much more complicated than making a brew, and it required advanced um, chemistry to get the medicine pure enough, and then it requires again like advanced medical technology. So there's some definite benefits to ayahuasca, and one is accessibility. How it's different. So imagine ayahuasca again. My experience is a little limited. I have taken ayahuasca analogs, like you had mentioned, like pharmahuasca, and I've taken things that uh, like Mimosa hostilis and Syrian rue. I've ingested those as a drink, so I'm familiar with the experience, and it's in many ways it's very similar, right? But ayahuasca or these other medicines, like think of them as like rising up in a wave, and then once you're in it, it kind of waves in and out of the experience.
Yeah.
It's a little like this because it's going through your liver, it's going through your gut. It's very dynamic. Maybe that's the way to describe it. It's dynamic. So with the infusion pump, what we can do is we can stabilize the experience by stabilizing the amount of pure DMT that's being infused into the bloodstream. Um, and so imagine being able, like we talk about those lower states. Remember, we were talking about those lower, more psycholytic states. Imagine
Mhm.
being able to go into a full DMT experience, but popping into just above the threshold where you're in it completely, but you're also completely here. And you can start to regulate your nervous system and calm it down. Like DMT, when you smoke DMT, everybody's heart rates shoots through the roof. It's an anxiety evoking experience. It's like getting in a hyperdimensional spaceship and somebody pushes a button and whoosh, like you're off on a warp speed, right? So imagine with this
Mhm.
technology that we can just pop you very gently into this mid-level state, and it's instead of it being wavy, because of the infusion rate, it's completely stable, just completely
Mm.
stable. You can pause it, you can orient to it, and you can look around. You can like physiologically adjust to it. And then imagine in that state saying, okay, are you ready? And pushing a button again, or giving a person another shot, another bolus through the infusion, and popping into a fully immersive state, which would be the equivalent of like the breakthrough ayahuasca experience, or the breakthrough DMT state, where you're not in this realm anymore, but you're in that realm. But instead of it being
Yeah.
fast, in that quick meaning like you're there and you're back, you can then step back in and reorient into that like hyper psychedelic alternate reality, and just be in it. So you can again orient to it. Your physiology starts to orient to it, the heart rate starts to calm down, your anxiety reduces, and you're just immersed in it. And then the idea is you can stay within that state, or whatever level you choose to stay at. You can stay in it as long as you want to. And there might be some physical limitations of what the body and mind can tolerate, but the way the medicine works, the way it's metabolized so quickly, how DMT is metabolized so quickly, it's very safe. Um, and then at any point, if there's like it's too much, or like which is very unlike any other medicine I've ever experienced, if it's too much or you feel complete, you just push a button to turn it off, and the person gently glides back to normal reality. Um,
Mm.
so, like, does that make sense how like different that is to be able to like program the intensity and the speed and the depth of a psychedelic experience, and then to literally turn it off when you're ready? That's what
Yeah.
DMTx provides.
It sounds like a dream. It's like driving an Aston Martin versus a regular car, I would imagine.
Yeah.
For me,
Yeah,
that's
it's
been some of the struggle. Go ahead.
no, it's just, yeah, I love the analogy,
When I did my pharmawaska, I took 300 milligrams of DMT orally, and it was gnarly. Like it just blasted me off into the space that really my nervous system couldn't handle, even as a seasoned psychonaut. It was just like so much. It was like someone hooked up electrodes to my neural
hmm
system, and it was like staticky. And I was trying to sit upright and hold an erect light body and navigate, and I could barely sit. And was
hmm
almost like disappointed in myself after it sort of wore off after 45 minutes, that I was like, oh, I need to train harder because I couldn't stabilize that.
hmm
Um, but then
That's
with
a
the
pretty heavy
pharmawasca, what ended
dose.
up,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, so far, don't recommend. Thumbs down for anyone
hmm
listening. But then about an hour and a half later, so I went completely sober after that. And then an hour and a half later, everything ramped back up again to like a level 11. And it had
You had another
much more
round
of
of it.
a,
hmm
oh my gosh, yeah, I ended up being, the whole experience lasted about 4 hours.
hmm
Um, And then the next round had much more intelligence to it, and it wasn't nearly as frying on my nervous system. And
Hmm.
it was a beautiful ayahuasca journey until then it almost got 5-MeO like, in the sense that everything got overwhelming all of a sudden. And I, started vomiting without expectation. And,
Uh,
ended up on the floor in my bathroom, just kind of having like 12 ego deaths, really intense ones that were necessary for what I was going through at the time. Um, but I hear you describe being able to gently come up into that and
mm,
stabilize, and that sounds like a phenomenal dream, given some
hmm.
of the shit I've waded through.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's like more dialed in. I don't want to say like it's more technological than ayahuasca, right? Or ingesting something,
Hmm.
through our digestive system. It's just something about it is a little more. I don't want to say controllable, but more. It provides greater agency. I think what we're seeing with DMT, it's like a fuel. I don't know how else to describe it. And the more fuel you have, the deeper you can go. But if you try to flood your engine with all of the fuel at once, it just overwhelms the system, right? And that sounds
Hmm.
similar to what you're describing. It's just like to get to what people would do with smoking changa or whatever is they would give themselves higher doses so they can be in that peak state longer, but because they're taking higher doses, they go into a peak state, which becomes like just overwhelming to the nervous system. And so imagine being able to do all of that work that you're describing, but in a way that dials in the progression so you don't flood your psychic engine, at the very beginning, right? Because that's hard. I've certainly been in those spaces where I've had multiple ego deaths and, on the floor, in agony, right? And so what would it look like? Can we actually step into those spaces without having to go through that process, or without having to go through it as intensely? Would be questions that are starting to arise with the DMTx as a technology. You know,
Which is rad, because then you get there, you've got your wits about you, you feel good, and now exploration is the name of the game. And
that's right.
what are some of the things you've discovered there that you've been bringing back to knowledge share?
There are so what have we discovered? So we've done 8 sessions, and we worked with, um, different psychonauts, but in a way it felt like an ongoing single session for the
Mm.
community. And, there are there's a space. There's several layers of the experience, and in the literature and people's experience, they talk about this waiting room space, right, which is more here than there, but you're in kind of like a domed room, or like they call it the waiting room. Not much is happening. Then there's a space beyond that, which is more there than here, and it's populated. Uh, it appears to be populated by a very complex ecosystem of other dimensional beings. Again, for lack of a better description, this is what people are actually experiencing. We can talk about the realness of it too, but that's what people are experiencing. And then there's a space, like another kind of quantum leap. There's a space beyond that seems beyond these entities, which is more of a like a unity experience, maybe even like a ongoing unfolding of the cosmos, of reality, or whatnot, right? It's more of a states of consciousness. I become one with everything, or, I feel and sense, this deep unfolding into the allness nothingness of being, right? So and it can be that's the part that can be a little overwhelming to folks. And so what we've brought back for now is fascinating. Like, we made contact with entities every time we did this. They describe themselves as being made out of the fabric of existence, And Andrew Gallimore talks about these like post-technological evolutionary states of like entities or beings or civilizations that are so advanced they can actually manipulate the fabric of existence. Well, it seemed like
Mm.
we were able to directly make contact with this presence that described itself as being made out of the fabric of existence, and that it's always here, like and that we're made out of it too. Like, how are we not made out of the fabric of existence as well? Like, we're made out of this um, presence, this consciousness, and that it's very kind. It's very loving, um, and compassionate, and kind of playful. Like, people talk about the DMT elves, and kind of this tricksy, tricksterish energy of the DMT experience. They're a little playful. They played with us a little bit. They laughed at some of our questions, like made fun of us and stuff. But they also felt a little distant, from the human experience. Like, in their space, maybe suffering doesn't exist in the same ways that it
Mm.
exists here. So they felt a little distant from us. And we just had these ongoing conversations about how to listen, how to make contact with this presence, even if we're not on the medicine, through our intuition. And I thought that was really meaningful. People would have meaningful experiences. Some people describe them as their family, and like one person, one of my friends, um, who's indigenous, was like, "Oh, these are the same beings that come to me in ayahuasca." So there's a familiarity with them, and like almost feels like they're family to us.
Mm.
And then practically, this is the most fascinating piece that we were, so we were testing the protocols. We were testing the infusion rates. We were testing how much to give in the bolus and the shots. Like, all of this was new. We had some papers to work with that had just been published, from the Imperial College, and another, I think, a Swedish study about DMTx. So we had some data to work with. We weren't coming in blind, but we were testing their assumptions too. We didn't want to just assume that because they were the research scientists, they were doing it right, the right way, right away. Um, and the medicine itself, this interaction between the beings, the medicine, the guiding, and everything. By the time it got to, I think it was the fourth person who went through it was one of our nurses who was really involved in figuring out the mechanisms of the tubing and the machine and the flow rate, all of the things. He was really involved with that. And they taught us how to improve the protocol so that we could step
Cool.
into it with greater ease and gentleness, and not only for us, but out of respect for them. To not, they taught us that it was appropriate to first go into the waiting room and then step into these deeper spaces. And so they
Mm.
taught us how to make the protocol better. And it felt like this sense of, and again, whether or not they're real or whatever, the experience itself, the relationship with the medicine, it taught us how to make the protocol better. So that, and it felt like, with the intention of, once we figured out how to dial in the protocol, we would then be taught other things that were dependent on us being able to work with a good protocol. Does that make sense? It's like they were preparing us for future conversations by teaching us how to make the protocol better. And that was
Absolutely.
mind blowing. Yeah. And so we did that. Like, again, we had a couple, our community was pretty diverse, and it's about like respecting the spirits, right? Or, like we call them entities, spirits, respecting the spirits, and that they felt like smoke DMT was like a blast off, and they were being intruded upon by human consciousness. Like, if they're real, if it's a real space, then we were being intruding upon them by blasting into their reality matrix, whatever that was. And that it was more
Mm.
polite for us to start with a lower dose go into the waiting room and then be met by the beings and then led into that deeper space with their permission. And so treating it as real and wanting to respect that maybe what if we really were imposing in on like some sort of hyperdimensional civilization? Maybe we would want to do it in a polite way as opposed to an intrusive way. It felt like, the intrusive way is like the old paradigm, like the scientific materialism. Let me see what I can get out of this space, where instead we wanted to be positive ambassadors into a space
Mm.
as a real explorer would.
That's so fascinating because my journey with DMT has been an interesting one, and got introduced to me maybe like a year and a half ago, and where I really started smoking it. And then people were like, "Oh, did you break through?" And I was like, "Yeah, I saw all the kaleidoscope stuff." They're like, "No, no, the breakthrough is beyond that." And I spent almost like a year smoking DMT trying to break through, and I could never get there. I also had some lung issues that were being massively triggered by smoking. Like I would hit a DMT pen and then immediately have to go hit my inhaler.
Um,
So that was kind of problematic, but I would find myself in this like room. And the first time I showed up, it was like these clowns came up and just started shoving things in my face like, "Oh no, you're not supposed to be here."
hmm,
Um, and then for most of that time, that was most of what I experienced, were these particular beings that would come up and try to distract me from getting through. And I went, "There's just something here. I must not be allowed through." I don't know what the timing problem is. And then on ayahuasca in October, which was really sort of like my return to ayahuasca, my shaman Hamilton helped me break through for the first time. And I remember purging, and I saw these clowns with these sharp teeth. I now more call them goblins, which I think they're more akin to the elves. But there was one just sort of sitting at me, looking at me as I'm vomiting. And I finally made contact with it and was like, are you friendly?" And it finally looked at me and smiled. I was like, "Oh, are you the guardian of the breakthrough?" And he was like, "Yes." He's like, "And now that you see us here," and he took me into a waiting room. And it was almost like felt like like an art museum, like a traditional art museum in New York with the huge ceilings and the big sofas and I sat on. And then when it was time, he opened these giant doors and sort of pushed me through to that.
hmm,
That first time, I skipped the entities and I went straight to the deep surrender to consciousness and just sat in
hmm,
that absolution of different colored sort of smokes and this heart that was a butterfly beating and some sort of melting clock that was meant to be this laugh at how we think there's time and there's no time.
hmm.
Um, but I've noticed that they often are, when I see the elves, that's how I know the breakthrough is coming, and then they sort of put me in that waiting
Hmm.
space. But sometimes I don't always get to break through, and I'm wondering if there was some sort of association with even my own higher consciousness being like, "Don't be rude.
Hmm.
Don't just blast off and be that not friendly ally."
Hmm. What if that's true? It's like if it's somehow objectively real, what if we are engaging in another space and that there are like ethical norms within that space that they want us to respect? It's just like
Mhm.
you wouldn't break down somebody's living room door and sit on their couch and try to have a
For 5 minutes.
conversation with them about, yeah, for 5 minutes, and then asking them, what can you do for me, right? Like, I just broke into your house and I'm sitting next to you and I'm sure you're freaked out a little bit, but I need some information. Like, that's, if you think of it in those terms, it's kind of obvious that what if, like, if we could, again, I think ayahuasca does this too. um and it's not my specialty, so again, I'm not trying to minimize that or say this is better. And it's just a different technology that allows us to administer in a way that allows you to take those steps and then receive permission. And then, so what we would do in the with the DMTx is when you made contact with the elf or whatever it was and wants to push you through that door, what we found is people need a stronger dose. They need a deeper and like
Mm.
a faster infusion, maybe a little bolus of DMT. A bolus is like a shot, like just a shot of pure DMT. It's like a fuel. And if they didn't have that, it would be hard to be pushed into the through the door. And so what we're working on is like, and we're in communication with the psychonaut as they're going through it. They're able to communicate with us, and they're describing the experience. So in that moment, when they receive permission and the door opens, we'd be like, okay, you ready for the next bolus? Give them a little shot of DMT, increase the infusion rate some. And what it would do is it would push them through that next portal and then stabilize at that deeper rate, at that deeper space. And then there's like okay, now what do we do with that, right?
Mm.
And like you said, it can be like this. Some people had these unfolding, reality matrix experiences, and others it was very gentle, and they were just hanging out talking with these beings that were with them, you know. So,
Yeah, I love it. One thing we've been working on in ayahuasca, my shaman's been teaching me how to navigate. And the last 2 weeks I was there was like a really deep unlocking for me of how to interdimensionally, like time port, teleport, interdimensionally travel. And it was different than what I had thought it was going to be
mm,
based on the triangulation of the heart and the third eye. And but I really finally discovered what worked for me to interdimensionally port.
mm,
And it's so excited to bring that to future journeys and just
right. What if that's
to,
a skill set that can be developed? We don't. I think, like we're on a screen right now. We're looking at each other through a two-dimensional screen, and we're used to movies. We're on computers all the time, and so a lot of people have these passive experiences where they witness whatever emerges around them, right? But the reality is, like, I like to imagine, like, let's drop the screen down and all the visuals you see, think of it as a landscape that has distance in it, and that you can turn, you can move, you can look at things and move towards, you can move out of. There's a lot of things that you can do. And I think there might be a way to navigate into different realms of consciousness through that space. You might end up there passively by just unfolding into it, but I think there's a way to consciously choose a path and go to a particular, location, so to speak. It might be with, a different time frame, different reality, but it is technically a location. So I
yeah.
think we're just tapping, we're just barely scratching the surface of what we think is possible with this medicine, within this new infusion technology that we're working with.
It is absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with next. It is just powerful. I feel like it's as powerful, if not more powerful, than this AI revolution that's happening and artificial intelligence. It's like this is that spiritual, like psycho spiritual technology
Mm-hmm.
of interdimensional realness
Mm,
that
I think it's up there with AI. I really do. So, and I think there will be an opportunity. We like future possibilities with this technology is, hooking the machine up to a computer, which is hooked up to um, biofeedback equipment and EEG equipment and heart rate and blood pressure and all the things. And there will be an algorithm and there will be artificial intelligence that will be able to titrate and change the flow rate based on the physiology of the human, and the intentions of what they want to do. And so that's a definite future possibility, is like bringing AI and DMTx together through the technology.
wow. Wow. What a time to be alive, what bodies we chose to have in this lifetime, what a, time and humanity we chose to come to Earth. It's pretty fascinating.
I think it's some sort of psychic response to our global crisis that we're in. Like,
Mm.
we need solutions that transcend our current problems. We can't, or our current mind states, and so I think what we're experiencing with the medicine work, just not with just DMTx, but just the psychedelics coming into the arena in general, are like a psychic response to like global level crisis. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to, not only find some acceptance to the crisis, which I think is important, but finding some sort of solution to our struggle so that we can transform the direction of the world right now.
Amen. Amen. I know that's what I'm here to do as well, help this world heal and transcend to the next level of consciousness. And we need all of the tools and allies that we can get to help with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Daniel, this has been such a pleasure. I thank you so much for being here. And where can my listeners best keep up with you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. DMTx.org is a great place to check out the DMTx program. And we have a new YouTube page called Psychedelic Shine. So you can Google that and watch a lot of videos on DMTx too. If people are interested in clinical work and healing work with ketamine, cannabis, DMT, or psilocybin, medicinalmindfulness.org is a great place to look at that. And we welcome visitors here in Boulder all the time from all over the country and the world. And then, if you're interested in being trained in these modalities, we have another program called Psychedelic School.org, and it's a psychedelic therapy training program. So those would be ways to get in touch with me. You can get on a newsletter, and we send those out pretty regularly. We are on social media, so you can sign up and join on social media. And then definitely love to have visitors. So I'd like to invite anybody to come hang out with us.
Fantastic. I will have those all linked up in the show notes as well for anyone that wants to
Great.
connect with you. And thank you so much for joining me today, Daniel.
Well, thanks for having me, Bear. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much.